Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Joshua Hart with us. He is a seasoned expert in conflict management. He actually went to school and got a degree in conflict management. I'm not sure what he was thinking. That sounds like a nightmare to me that you want to do conflict management for your whole life. But Joshua is the director of operations for a public relations firm and the founder of the Joshua Hart Consulting Company. Joshua, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how'd you end up where you are?
Yeah, so I ended up here in conflict by working in radio. So my background is I spent 14 years doing morning show radio right out of college, fell in love with it. The whole time I wanted to go in, when I was an undergrad, I wanted to go into family counseling and marriage counseling. And then no one told me that a 21, 22-year-old with no kids and no wife would be a bad marriage counselor. And so when I graduated, I needed to find like a pivot. I really love the conflict piece of how people deal with communication and deal with strife and those kinds of things. So I pivoted and I went into radio by happenstance, but I saw the breakdown that was happening inside of radio, where people were having arguments and fights and loud screaming matches on the floor, and they weren't communicating well, and it caused a lot of strife. And so I realized for my second act part of my life, I wanted to go back and get my master's in conflict management. So I was able to do that back almost 10 years ago. And ever since then, I have been working. Even before then, I was working in that employee relations kind of field. I always seemed to line up where I was the go-between between management and staff, and kind of working through those things. So I found a great spot in there. And then I ended up starting a consulting company, working with organizations, helping with generational conflict, helping with miscommunication issues, doing a lot of crisis management. And I find that really fuels me and and pushes me forward in my career. So
awesome. So I believe your personal story from an early age is incredibly inspiring. Can you share a little bit about your early experiences in life, and really how did that shape your passion for effective communication and conflict resolution?
I mean, yeah. So growing up, I had a speech impediment, which caused me to step back a little bit. And my mom was great. My mom, I remember one time she kind of pulled me aside and she was talking to me because I'd had a rough day at school. Elementary kids can be tough. I had a rough day at school, and she kind of pulled me aside and she was like, is feeling bad about yourself going to make things better? Or is finding a way to work through it going to be the solution for that? And so, that moment, I kind of had a light switch for me, and I went forward and I started looking at things differently, the way I can communicate. Even then, when I was growing up and I wanted to be a theology major, I wanted to pursue theology, and I got into a big fight with the head of the department in my university, as freshmen do. And so, 19, I was fighting with him about different things. And I realized, man, there's a better way to communicate. So like those kind of things, stepping outside of yourself and stepping outside of the situation that you're in, and finding ways to move forward and move past it has been like a pivotal thing for me in my life. Again, I don't know how many people who have a background with a speech impediment going on to doing 14 years of morning radio, to doing a TEDx talk. I became very comfortable in my own skin. I acknowledged it when I needed to, and I was able to reframe kind of my situation, and that has helped me a ton. And so now moving forward, when I'm talking with someone who's going through strife, I make sure to help them also reframe where they're at. If you can put a narrative around what you are, and so some people, when they have that negative narrative, I have a 7-year-old, and we talk a lot about negative narratives and not putting a negative narrative on yourself. Like, man, the world's really good at pulling you down and giving you a label and giving you something that says you are who we say you are, and don't let that define you. You find the things that give you hope and give you life and give you breath, and chase those things and follow those things. So we find that's what I have always put forth when I'm helping someone is, again, focus on reframing your narrative and not being kind of caught up in excuses.
That is awesome. And quite frankly, I think it is amazing when someone is able to reframe whatever situation they're in and be able to make success out of that. Our listeners all know that I'm a John Maxwell certified person, and one of his books is Failing Forward. And, and there's tons of books out there, but I think what's more valuable than that is talking to people that have been through it. And, that ability to reframe. And what really stuck with me is at 19 years old, when you were having the argument with the head of the university, that you stopped and said, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And I think you even said, as all freshmen do, which leads me to I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but thinking about generational differences.
Yeah.
I've always been a firm believer that about 3/4 of what we call generational differences aren't generational differences. We all went through it.
Yep.
And so my question is, how much of what we view as an issue is really not an issue? It's just part of growing up and part of becoming mature.
100%. And then usually when I get a phone call, and this was much more popular about 5 years ago, but I would get a phone call, hey, you need to come fix my millennials or whatever it was. And I always laugh because, like, the same boomers that were calling about the millennials were the flower children who were off protesting Vietnam and putting flowers in rifles and having love-ins and all the different stuff. Like everyone goes through a stage. It's like a cycle that you're going to repeat no matter what. I think the only thing that makes generational differences true is the shared experiences. And so that's really kind of what it comes down to. Pew Research is where I get most of my information. They're great on this sort of stuff. And they talk about, like, basically it's the landmarks that make up a generation. So, whether it was World War II for the silent generation, or Korea for the silent generation, or Vietnam for boomers, whether it was go back and look at 9/11 for a lot of millennials, like things that make up the history, the shared experiences. And I know this working for the PR firm that I'm at now. I have much younger staff. I go, oh yeah, man, since 9/11. And literally they were like, what was that again? Like, they have a hard time remembering those things when they were like 3 or 4 years old. So they don't have the memory that, you and I would have of, like, we know where we were, what was happening at that point in time, when we found out, if we saw things, like, we remember that point of view. And so for a lot of those generational differences, it's a shared belief system, whether the government's good, the government's bad, whether if you work hard. So a lot of it's placed on shared experiences. And then I think there's a big difference in where you're located. I'll see people who are from, like, for instance, New York City. And growing up in New York City, I did not. I grew up in the state of Texas. But, you learn not to trust people. Like, I had a friend come visit. He spent his whole life in New York. And he pulled up to talk to a parking attendant in Fort Worth. And the parking attendant said, hey, the lot's full, but if you drive down 4 blocks, turn south, there's another parking lot there. The guy's name is John. John will help you. And he's like, that's way too much information. And he felt like something's about to happen to me. I'm about to get mugged. Like, this is a setup for a very elaborate con that's about to take place. And really, that's just how people are in Texas. So there are both regional differences and there's shared experiences. But as far as, like, one generation being lazy or non-committal or bad at work, I don't think any of that has any sort of weight to it. I've seen millennials who do bad work. I've seen boomers who do bad work. I've seen Gen Xers who do bad work. I've also seen young people who work really hard and are passionate. Yes, sometimes that passion is misplaced. And sometimes that passion, is kind of like is a bee in a jar that's just bouncing around all over the place and doesn't really know the protocols or the rules put forth to make a positive place in the workforce. But I find that usually those names and those labels that we put on them aren't accurate.
So I want to ask a question. It's not directly related to leadership and what we're talking about, but with what you just said, it just popped into my head. So when we talk about the shared experiences and generational differences, many times in today's world, we talk about, diversity, inclusion, and equity and all of those things. And it's in the news right now. It's all over the place. But the other piece of that is when people talk about hate, racism, things like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I realized as a young man was that what some people look at as maybe hate, we also have to take into account what generation we're talking about and what they've been through. And I'll give a simple example. Growing up in the 1980s and into the 90s, a lot of the things that we could buy and technology as it has come about came from Japan. And I knew people that would adamantly say, well, I'm not buying that Japanese junk. I don't want anything made by those Japs. Yeah. And I remember one older gentleman in particular, because I had an aunt, which was Japanese. And I said to him, why are you so hateful towards the Japanese? And he went on to explain that he grew up and was in a place where they had taken all the Japanese in America and put them in internment camps during World War II. But his view of the Japanese was what he had lived.
Yeah.
And so how many misunderstandings, I guess, is really what I'm getting at. And I'm using hate, as one of those. How many misunderstandings do we encounter because we're not understanding of what that generation went through, those shared experiences?
So I was consulting with a gentleman who was a part of the Sons of the Confederacy, going back to kind of the hate narrative that we're on right now.
Yep.
Sons of Confederacy, I don't think they would say they're a hate group. I don't think they would agree with that. And so we were talking about the Confederate flag, which the Confederate flag, I would say for most people outside of people who are Sons of the Confederacy, represents racism. It represents a lot of things that have a negative connotation to them.
Yes.
And so we were talking about that, and he goes, the Confederate flag, to me, you can't tell me what I think the Confederate flag should mean. I think it means X, Y, and Z. It means loyalty to the Southern traditions. It means being proud of where you're from, and all of those popular narratives. And then through our course of me helping him reframe a narrative and seeing outside of his point of view. So I feel like we can get to that later on, but I feel like after reframing that point of view, he was able to see that other people outside of him, because he viewed himself as not being someone who viewed other minorities differently. It wasn't about putting anyone else down. It was about being proud of who he was from. But he saw that when the Klan would use that flag and they didn't say anything, when other hate groups would use that flag and they wouldn't say anything, they lost ownership of it.
Yep.
And so I think that's kind of like that to me, like reframing that narrative. And he was able to kind of like over the course of an hour-long consulting session was able to go, I see, I kind of see the point now. Although that's not what I believe, that flag has been used in lots of other narratives where people who do believe that. And so it is confusing for people who don't see it the way I see it to understand. And he was able to get to that realization. We didn't change anything. Right? They still use the flag. They still hike the flag, but he got past the victimhood. And that's something that I'm really big on, is I'm really big on trying to get past the victimhood. And so they felt like they were the victim, which is, I know, a really weird stance for most Americans probably to hear. but they felt like they were being victimized because we don't believe in bigotry. We don't believe in this. We just wanted to believe like you're proud of your country. And one of the things that he brought up is he goes, it makes no sense to me how I can't use this flag because I'm proud of where I am and where I came from and the things that my relatives did as far as like fighting for their freedoms and however you want to frame that. I know that's a hot button issue. He goes, but other people can place flags of different countries on their window and they can be proud of who they are and where they came from. And why can't I do that? And that was his victimhood mentality. And so I'm a big believer that if you break down the victimhood mentality, it takes you out of that emotional space, which if you're thinking emotionally, there's no way for you to think logically. And so taking you out of that emotional space and pulling you back in to where you're able to reframe and see something differently for the first time and then get a better understanding. It doesn't necessarily change your opinion, but you have a better understanding. So I always try to have people, what is it like? Is it, Einstein who said that? No, Newton. One of the guys said the true test of knowledge is being able to hold two opposing ideas at the same time. So if you're able to do that, if you're able to hold two opposing views at the same time and go, I can see both of them. I have my one that I prefer, but I can at least understand the other side. If we can get a lot of people to do that about these hot button issues that are facing our society, man, we'll see a massive difference in the way that we communicate and the way that we talk to people.
So taking that and connecting it.
Yeah.
Let's go to the boardroom. And so we're in a board meeting and there are people that are adamantly there's an issue. Let's say it's a budget issue and we got to decide which bucket we're going to put this money in for the year. And there are people adamantly arguing their own points. And is that any different than what we just described? And how would you apply that in the boardroom? Because sometimes I feel like from a leadership standpoint, we look at these big issues like we just talked about in the nation, and we apply something or attempt to apply something. But then when we get to the boardroom, it's like, well, it's okay to have this disagreement here and to think for yourself and to not be able to hold on to two opposing ideas at the same time. And we're going to fight tooth and nail. But really, is it any different at the granular level? That's still the same thing happening. And how would you apply your same methodology in the boardroom?
So I've seen this. I have never been invited to come help mediate a boardroom, but I have done this for a church board, which you would think would be easier, but it's absolutely not. Church boards can be just as vicious and just as mean as a boardroom of any top 500 company. And the thing that I see happen the most is that they're not necessarily, at first they start arguing points, but when they realize we're getting to a spot where we're both kind of gridlock, now I have to dehumanize you. Yep. Now I have to pull you down by making you emotional, by insulting your intelligence, insulting your past decisions, insulting other things. So one of the things that I try and do when I'm in that scenario is I try to keep things on message. So I write a big thing on the note where it says, we're going to stay on message. And so the first time, and everyone has to agree to it, right? We all agree. So the first time I hear, well, that didn't work out so well last time, did it, John? Whatever it was. I go, hey, is that staying on message? This is about this topic, this time, this situation. And I always try to pull it right back in and calling that person out for those little digs to try to get the other person emotional. So there's a great book called Staying in the Fire. And it's what I use a lot for my negotiation tactics when I'm negotiating things that I want. If I can make it uncomfortable for you, human tendency is for you to get out of it. If I can make things uncomfortable, if I can have a dig at your past decision or your intelligence or your looks or your clothes or your car or your family, if I can get under your skin just a little bit, it makes you uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable, you want out of the room. And so the book talks about being able to stay in it. And even though you've come at me, I'm not going to retaliate in kind, but I'm going to be able to sit in this uncomfortableness for as long as it takes to get to our resolve. And so you'll often find, at least for me, in the meetings that I've been able to mediate, the people who do that first have lost the argument. They've lost the logical fight of whether good decision or bad decision, and they're resulting to the childish ways of the schoolyard pulley, where now I'm just going to, do your mama jokes for 5 or 10 minutes to try to get you upset and to change what the conversation is. So bringing it right back in and focusing up. So I think that plays a lot to it again, is that reframing of what we should be saying, what we should be doing, and making sure we don't let ourselves become emotional or become a victim.
So from a multi-generational standpoint, kind of putting that into context, how much of what you view in the issues that you've encountered with the multi-generational workforce, again, back to, and we kind of agreed upon earlier that a lot of it is not an issue that's multi-generational, but what I'm kind of envisioning in my mind is sometimes we have some folks that are just coming into the workplace, maybe have a couple years of experience, and then we got somebody over here that has 50 years of experience. And sometimes that experience in working with different companies, sometimes that experience can become a hindrance because you've done it all and you don't need to listen and you don't need to get information, right? My way. Yeah. And I did that in 1955. And let me tell you how it's going to turn out. How do we work with that and stop ourselves and make sure that we're, one, looking to the people that have experience for all the great information that they might have. And then secondly, looking to the newer folks to see what maybe they have to add to it that we didn't know.
So this is why I think I thrive really well in this position as far as my consulting firm goes, because I also live in this world as well. So I'm a director of operations for a mid-level PR firm. So I deal with employees who are 21 years old all the way up to well into their 60s. So I have a whole range of employees that I have to deal with. So I have both real world application of what actually happens, and then I have all the technical book knowledge as well. So pairing that together. What I tend to do with my young, ambitious, I just graduated college and I am the smartest person alive mentality, which I see a lot. And again, I can relate because I was once in that same boat. But is I go, hey, I love that idea. So you have to answer 3 things for me. 1, is it faster? Is it more efficient? And then, what will it take to get done? And if they can go through and answer those things for me and prove it out, like, again, I don't ever squash it. Say, no, that's not how we do it. We shouldn't do it that way anymore. I go, great. I love new things. But, and kind of on your own time, I don't say that, but they take it to the sense of like, I have to prove this. So they stay later. They work harder to prove out their theories and they prove it. And either it fails and it isn't more effective. It isn't, a better use. It's not a better outcomes and those kind of things. And they find that to be false, or it turns out that it is. It's more efficient and it has better outcomes. And if that's the case and they can prove that, well, then we all need to adjust. So I don't ever want to squash their dreams. I want them to follow them in a controlled way. So here are the parameters that you're allowed to play with this. Play with it. And you'll see that in a lot of really big tech companies. They allocate time for their personal projects. So we're not saying you can't do things. We're giving you parameters around when you can have your free time to test theories that we say won't be effective, but we can be wrong. So understanding that concept, giving them parameters and times to where they can work on things that they think will save the company. And again, I have seen it before where that has worked. And I've seen it before where it hasn't. But either way, they've tried it and it was a success. And when everyone praises them, or it was a failure, and we go, hey, man, it's awesome that you're trying new things. Don't stop trying new things as long as it's working within our confines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears slightly, one of the things that you emphasize is the importance of intentional communication.
Yes. Now,
I kind of thought, like in big companies, I thought the idea was to hold all the information, don't give any out. And I think it's sometimes known as the mushroom syndrome. I thought that was the goal. But you talk about intentional communication. How does that play into working generationally as well as just working strategically to implement whatever plans that you have agreed upon?
So where I usually come in for employee relations or crisis, it is because people were not being intentional. They thought, "Oh, we're gonna be laissez-faire about our communication," and that can probably work if you're with, if you have 35 employees or less. But once you start getting up into the 55, 100, 200, 300, you have to be intentional with everything that you do. That's why Fortune 500 companies have a VP of communication. That's why they have legal team that has to go. They have a whole system in place because you can't just say something. And that's one thing that I try to encourage people that I'm talking to. Like, when you're a leader, your words have a lot of power. You can say something, and even if it's meant as a joke, if it's not clear, if it's not done in the right way, can be taken hurtfully. It can be taken as an insult. It can be taken 1,000 different ways that you weren't intending. And so I'm always, if you're not good with that, you need to get good, or you need to get hidden. One of the two. And so I've literally worked with someone before, and my recommendation to their board was, you just need to keep them in a room somewhere where they have no access to people, because they were genius. They were genius at the parts of the company that they needed to be there for. But they were a human wrecking ball when it came to employee relations, and not intentionally. Like, they weren't walking in the door today goes, "How many people can I make cry?" But that's what was happening. And so I was like, man, so we basically, they built him an office that had a outer office where someone else worked. So he got to stay back in the inner office and work all day and have no interaction with anyone who wasn't above a certain plane. That's not ideal. That's not a great system set up in place, but they weren't willing to lose that employee, and they needed him for revenue. And so I said, well, then you have to protect your team from that person. And so we built in barricades. So it's part of that is, again, being intentional, understanding that your words have power. And if I'm going to say something or put out an email or a memo or whatever it is, I'll spend 5 hours just sitting on it over something as may seem as mundane as a dress code. And it can go down to that granular. Hey, Kate, have I thought about different cultures and customs? Have I thought about, heat, cold? Have I thought about, whether is this cost prohibitive? Like, I'm going through, and you're just kind of like thinking through everything that you possibly can. And even with that, you're going to miss the mark sometimes, but at least your team will know, man, he did try. He didn't just say it, hey, everyone's doing this, and not think about what other ramifications you can go. And I think that goes a long way.
So does intentional communication mean just lots of emails sent out on a regular basis, or does that mean that you're actually going to be intentional? And I guess a secondary question, should you also be intentional about how you communicate? Or should you just say, I am one of those people that, I don't really do well with people in person, so I will only communicate the rest of my life via text and email? Or should you think about, maybe I should deliver this message in person?
Yeah. So I think that goes into, that intentionality is, I understand how I am. So like, I have an employee right now who, if I sent her a text message that didn't have a exclamation point or like a smiley face attached to it, it's seen as criticism, right? And then I have another employee that if I did that, they think that I'm being sarcastic and I'm being rude. So it's like, you have to understand your team and what they need. And one of the biggest criticisms of that mindset from leaders that I've talked to is like, why should I, the leader, have to adjust my communication to get the people who I'm paying to do a job to do what they're supposed to do? They need to learn who I am and what I'm about, and then they all change their ways around me. And I go 100%. And 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you're exactly right. But today, that's not the way it's done. So if you want to have a team that is motivated, driven, all the things, the leadership mindset where they feel like they're part owner of the company, you have to change the way that you view that. And you go, I want the very best employees, and I want the very best employees to do their very best work. And if that means I have to communicate to 30 different people 25 different ways, I'm okay with that, because I know that it gets me the best result on the back end. And so it's not about me. It's not about what they should do for me. Not about what I had to do when I was growing up. You hear that all the time when I'm talking to executives. I had to do this. Well, back in my day, you just kept your mouth shut. And you stay here. You wouldn't leave until the boss left, or whatever it was. Like those kinds of narratives, again, we need to move past them and get into what is the end result. What do I want at the end of the day? Well, I want my team to get a job done so I can charge a client a set amount of payment for that task. I keep the profits. I pay my team what I pay my team, and we move forward. And if all that is being done, get out of the way. Stop trying to make it about like the respect that you feel like you deserve. I'm not saying get walked on or get disrespected, but reframe it as like, hey, if they're being rude, like for instance, I had someone who would do things intentionally to be disrespectful, and that was a conversation that we had. Right? You can't be blatantly disrespectful. I'm not going to tolerate that. But if you're saying, man, I have a hard time if you, like I had someone come to my office. We were having a meeting about hourly work. I was like, I'm really confused because by the workload that we have agreed to, you're still fine. And so a few hours passed and he came in, he sat down in my office and he goes, I really feel like you're being very dismissive when you bring up hours, because hours are numbers. And you're not talking about how I'm feeling about those hours, which I know the feeling word makes a lot of people 45 and up lose their mind, but it is real. And I said, hey, I can understand that point of view. I can understand how you would say that when you're talking about how you feel, and I go, but the numbers say you're wrong, it's dismissive. And I don't ever want to feel like I'm dismissing your feelings. So how can we solve this better? So here's what I'm seeing. I see what you're seeing. How can we rectify this problem together? And we sat down for 25 minutes and we worked out a plan. It was exactly what I wanted to do. He felt heard and appreciated. He understood the situation that was happening on a broader scale and has been fine ever since. But it would have been really easy for me to be someone who's not approachable. Because also I have a standing rule at any organization that I'm in. You can tell me anything. You can call me a son of a gun. You can say I'm the worst person in the world. There's no repercussions from those private interactions. If you call me out on the floor in front of a team, I have to respond in kind. But if you come to me privately and go, I feel like you're being a big jerk, we can have a conversation about that and we can solve it. So having that open door policy that's truly an open door policy gets people to come and share things that would have ultimately caused that person to probably quit because they don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're being appreciated, and they don't see a bigger picture. And so now, because of that interaction and that intentional communication, I know when I'm talking to that employee, here's how I have to get that done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And just as adding, I have a client that we took through, as I talked about earlier, the DISC process. And one of the things that we have that we can offer, a company or an office that has went through this, or we call them cubicle cards, but they basically hung their personality profile on their door. And so then everybody in the business knew as you walked in to see Joe, you glanced up and you remembered that, that's right, Joe loves to talk. And so, I can adjust a little bit. And what was interesting was the leader of that business was obviously, and that's not always the case, but they were a high dominance person. And so the rule kind of was when he went around and visited with everybody, he would adjust a little bit and sit down and maybe talk with this person about what happened over the weekend before he got to the point. But when you went to his office, you were entering his office and, his were talking bullet points, don't take my time, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so it really worked well because everybody adjusted slightly as they went into someone else's office.
Yep.
And I think what it comes back to and I'm kind of summarizing everything we've talked about. It's one, being intentional about making sure that you are communicating and maybe connecting with people, showing that you understand there are differences out there, but also listening and acting on what you hear. You know, if somebody comes, and I've seen so many times where somebody comes into the executive's office and says, I feel like this. And they just say, okay, well, you're entitled to that feeling. Thanks for letting me know. Well, that doesn't do anything. But if they act on it and say, all right, I don't see it that way, but let's hash this out as you just described, that works much better. Yep. So the last piece I wanted to touch on before we leave the interview section is you have international experience, I believe.
Yeah.
You actually have an advanced facilitation certificate from the United Nations, which that's
true.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But you've worked internationally. I always like to ask folks that have worked internationally, as it pertains to leadership and communication, is there anywhere in the world that has it figured out better than what we do? Like, is there anywhere we should be taking lessons from, or are we all in the same boat?
I think we're all in the same boat. Now, you can look at some like Switzerland, Denmark, and they have, much more like mediation courts, but they haven't solved any problems. They have more steps to go through. And I think, I don't think anyone's better off. The mind opened for me when I was doing work with this NGO, and I was talking with groups, and it's really topical right now, but between Israel and Palestine. And our goal is we were going to take college age students from both countries and sit down, and they had to have a conversation. And at the end of this 9 week course, they would have expressed their opinions, and they couldn't say all Israelis are bad or all Palestinians are bad, because I know 10 who are pretty cool on both sides. And that was kind of the ultimate goal. We're not trying to solve anything. We're not trying to make, I'm not saying that we're going to do peace in the Middle East. We're not doing any of those things. But we're just having a conversation where I can have a conversation with someone. Because when conversations break down, that's when war begins.
Yep.
And so we were able to do that. And I remember I was doing my facilitation, and I'm supposed to have them, stay on focus and stay on track and all those different things. And I realized this young girl was staring out the window and looking back at the screen, and staring out the window and looking back at the screen. And I said, I really need you to stay focused. I know we're getting close to time. And, and she's like, I'm so sorry, Mr. Josh. She was like, normally I would be focused, but they weren't supposed to start bombing us until 8. And they're bombing us a half hour early. I have to turn off my computer. And everyone was so passive about that. Like, okay, well, bye, good luck, see you. And I'm like, she just said she's being bombed. Like we all just like breeze past that for a second. And how laissez-faire that was to both parties. She was in Gaza at the time. So from both parties to understand what that is and what that means. And I'll see you next time. And that morning for me, kind of put in comparison, I thought I was having a horrible day. This morning, the Starbucks barista got my coffee order wrong. I got stuck in traffic. I'm having the worst day possible. And I come and I sit down and I see things that are happening on a large scale. And when they were asking me questions after the session were over, they could talk to me as an American, and they would laugh at the problems that Americans thought were a huge deal. And so those kind of things, I found that was really impressive. That we see things on such a small scale for the most part. American youth see things on such a small scale, and when you expand, you become intentional. When you try to pursue things that are outside the way that you normally view things, it really opens up your experiences to see things in a whole new way.
Yeah, I mean, that story just alone is, I think, for me, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, how small many of the things that we look at as a catastrophe really, really are.
Yeah.
I said that was the last question in the interview section, but as I glanced at my notes, I realized I did have one more. I got to hit this one because I really don't know much about it. I saw it. You've written about all kinds of things. after getting ready for this, I ordered a trampoline, but it's not here yet. You got to tell us about trampoline listening. What is that?
So trampoline listening is just that kind of like that bounce back and forth. You don't sit there and like explain your whole message. And so you bite size up. So I'm going to hear you a little bit. You're going to hear me a little bit. And it's just that up and down, the back and forth of giving that communication style. So,
now wait a minute. Well, what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. I mean, that's not, how's that work?
Yeah. So I think the methodology of putting that in place is what helps people like have to stop talking. So, and again, like we do that when we're doing like mediation. We'll do shuttle mediation where I'm sitting down, go, hey, I'm going to sit down with you for 10 minutes. I'm going to do an intake of everything you want to say in 10 minutes. I am walking out of the room in 10 minutes. I'm going to go to the other room. And that's usually when people have broken down entirely and they can't be in the same room with each other. And so trampoline, it was just a way for you to go, hey, I'm putting an action in place where I'm making sure that after I've said my one statement, I'm not dogpiling and doing 15 or 20 different things that like stack, and then you can't possibly answer all of those. And then I go, aha, but you never answered this, so I win. It's just a way of going, hey, here's 1 point, you counterpoint. Here's 1 point, you counterpoint. It's going back and forth.
I like it. I may start using that with my daughter. So as we're coming to an end, I end every episode with 3 questions, kind of rapid fire.
Yep.
And the first question really, which I've explained many times, but the short version is it came out of many conversations with leaders, business owners. One of the things, and you even alluded to it earlier, well, when I was younger, this is what we did, or when I graduated high school, or the new students that we're hiring, they don't have. And I thought, well, let's start asking the leadership experts from around the world if we had all the school administrators in front of us and we could give them one piece of advice of something they could institute or put into the curriculum to help to turn out better, well-rounded people for society as well as leaders, what would that one piece of advice be?
So I would say my thing is to support your teachers. I see time and time again where administrators are beholden to parents. Parents call up, they call the school board puts pressure on the principal puts pressure on the teacher. I think if for my work when I've done with both university professors and teachers at the high school level, they feel unsupported. They feel like, man, it is me versus the world out here. My principal won't support me. The parents are attacking me. I gave their daughter an 89 when clearly she deserved a 95. Like everything is a fight. And I am alone in this because I get the pull down from the school and I get the push up from the parents. I think if we would have an administrator who says, I support my teachers as long as they're right. I support my teachers 100%. They have the right to grade how they grade. They have the right to discipline in the classroom as long as they're within the confines of the rule book. I'm not going to go back and make a mandate that they have to change based on a parent. I will stand up to parents when they call, those kinds of things. I worked with a high school principal out of, he wasn't in Texas, and he was telling me, because the biggest problem I have isn't really the kids, it's the teachers. The teachers feel so vulnerable and like they're under attack all the time that they are walking little balls of victimhood that one little tap or touch and they explode, and it's a massive problem, and it's this, that, and they were also unionized, so it became a whole stockpile of problems. And I said that falls upon you. He goes, what do you mean? And I said in my work, if my team feels always on edge, that's my fault. I haven't made them feel comfortable. I haven't made them feel that they have a safe environment to come work. I haven't made them feel appreciated or valued. That's a me thing. I need to fix that. That's not them. They don't need to get tougher. I need to be better about how I say, hey, when you come in here, you can always rely on me. As long as you're doing everything by the book, if you follow the rules, I have your back 100%. And I said, if they feel that, they feel more comfortable to really do what they need to get done and not just be like, well, it doesn't matter because the parents are going to complain to you and you're going to come to me and I'm going to have to change the grade anyway. So it doesn't matter. And then that's when those things kind of grow. So if I would talk to administrators at large, it would be to trust your teachers to do their job.
I like it. In that perspective, so many times when we ask the question, we get very great answers of things that we could teach, skills, so on and so forth. But thinking about it, and I am married to a teacher, and I hear some of these things, but I've never really put it into that perspective, or in your words, reframed it that way, that the teachers really are in, I've always said mechanics, have the worst job in the world because you only call them when there's a problem. And I think maybe teachers fall into that same kind of vein there, that they're constantly getting criticism where they should be getting accolades for what they do. So I really like that. Thank you for that. The second question is, what is your go-to book that throughout your life you've continually went back to that has given you good insight?
I have found more pearls it's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a very popular book. It's a thick book and a little hard to get through. But I have found so many pearls in there that I've been able to use for speeches, use for consulting work, use when I'm giving an example. And so Thinking Fast and Slow it talks about the mindset and how our brain is divided up basically into two forms. There's the fast thinking brain, like, how am I getting to work today? Have you ever driven to the office and not remembered every turn that you took to get there? It's because you were in fast thinking mode, or you tied your shoes, but you don't know how you tied your shoes. So that's fast brain. And then the slow brain is, I'm contemplating, 3 jobs that are up to take, but I could only do one. So I have to sit and focus and look at pros and cons and weigh things out. And that's how the world should be. We should have fast brain and slow brain. Where we get into trouble is where our brain starts to put things that should be fast into the slow category and things that should be slow into the fast category. And so part of that is going through and making sure that I'm taking my time when I need to and keeping things that should be fast and keeping them in the fast lane and getting those things done faster so that my processing speed is available for when I need to really stop and break down what I need to break down and get done.
Awesome. So, and the last question is, in the ever-changing world of technology, what is your favorite, most useful piece of technology today?
My phone. My phone has changed. I don't have any social media on my phone. I purposely took all of that off. But the phone has a way to keep you connected, both phone, text, communication, going back and forth. I have different companies that have different type of messaging systems. So for some companies, they have me on Basecamp, or some companies they have me on Slack, or some companies they have me on whatever. And being able to be connected, but also at the same time, there is a sense of, I make sure that I set my boundaries. So I know, hey, if you reach out to me, it may be 24 to 48 hours before I get back to you. And that is kind of anyone that I interact with, go, hey, just realize that I'm not going to be the guy that you Slack and then within a half hour I've gotten back to you. Either that's because I'm taking my time and thinking through it, or because I'm working on something else and I don't want to step away. And so again, being intentional of how I communicate those expectations. If there's an emergency, you can always call me. And if I'm available, I'll take that phone call. But setting up those expectations. But I think the phone has really changed how I can be anywhere and everywhere and help anyone all at one time. That may be a very lame answer to a lot of people, but I feel like that piece of technology will continue to evolve and change. And as long as we're able to be intentional with it, I love what the schools in New York have done, where they have said no cell phones for kids in high schools from bell to bell. I wish that would be rolled out here in Texas as well. But keeping kids off of the phone, but also realize that I'm not just on my phone going through Instagram and TikTok and Twitter or X, whatever it is now, and going through all of those social media apps. I'm spending it either reading books on my phone, reading articles on my phone. I get all the newspapers done through my phone. And so I'm able to stay connected, stay informed, and can communicate on one device. To me, it's a home run of a technology piece.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope maybe we can have you back on again in the future. I think
Love it.
I think we could talk for another hour or so, probably. For our listeners, where can they find out more about you if they want to get in contact with you or utilize your consulting services?
So yeah, it's easy. You can go to joshhartconsulting.com. You can email me at josh@joshhartconsulting.com. Again, it'll be 24 to 40 hours probably before I get back to you. But you can email me there. All the ways to contact me directly are on my website. Just go there.
Awesome. And we'll have your website linked in the show notes. Again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. For our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out some of our back episodes if you haven't listened to them all. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like us or follow us with whatever platform you're on. We love to see your comments and what you're getting out of it. Until next time, we appreciate you.